Hi, this is Ed Marks. I serve as the Chief Digital Officer for Tech Mahindra Health and Life Sciences, along with the HCI Group. And I want to welcome you today to our session on digital transformation. Technology is not enough. So we've been talking a lot all year long about digital transformation, and oftentimes we fall in the trap of thinking it's all about technology, but it's just not enough. And that's really the topic of today. So we're going to talk about how healthcare must embrace human-centered design for true transformation to take place. I'm so excited that we have Amy Heymans here with us. I think she's perhaps the best in the business in terms of understanding design. This is not new for her nor her company Madpow. They've been doing this for a long time. So we have a lot that we can learn from her and her experiences in human-centered design. And I'm sure by the end, if you're not convinced already, that you'll believe that human-centered design is critical for the successful adoption of digital transformation. So really excited to have you here, Amy. Thank you for being our guest.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed. Always
So
love
this
chatting
is
with
live. Yeah, thank you. This is live, and two reasons we go live. One is to engage with you. So you all know how to do this with the software. You can ask questions at any time. I'll be moderating those. And so we'll try to get to every question. So one of us says something, especially Amy, that you have a question about or want to go deeper in, just chat, and we will definitely respond. The second thing is live is sort of fun because you never know what's going to happen. And a lot of different things have happened, and it just makes it more interesting, I think, for everyone in terms of the experience. So let's jump right in. So Amy, please, can you share a little bit about yourself and in that journey, how Madpow came to be?
Sure. So I actually have loved, art and creativity, ever since I was a child, and majored in design in college, and took that to the web during the dot-com boom. And my focus was on the aesthetic of, the things people are looking at and interacting with, and making it beautifully branded and things like that. But I quickly learned that it's not just about how something looks, it's about how useful and usable and desirable it is. And so I transitioned my sort of visually oriented experience into user experience, into human-centered design, into making sure that the digital solutions we were creating would be received well by the audiences interacting with them, and then took that to not just digital, but to also service experiences, to innovating new products and services, and to ultimately helping people to change their behaviors in the health space. But what human-centered design is really taking a collaborative, inclusive approach to design. It's sort of what we all know in our gut, our intuition. We shouldn't go off in a silo and make things that will then be delivered at scale and impacting the lives of millions, right? We should work with them, design with them, invite them to the table of innovation to weigh in and design with us, so that we will increase the likelihood that the things we're making, the services, the products, the digital experiences will add meaning and value to people's lives. So that for me very much resonates in terms of the purpose and direction of my career, and where we've taken Madpow as a business. We are 80 passionate, creative innovators who leverage human-centered design to improve outcomes in health, in financial services, and other industries as well. So we're really, really passionate about doing that and making an impact.
No, that's great. And we're going to get into some examples of some of the work of your organization and just the transformative impact that it has in terms of a variety of outcomes. How Well, also tell us how you came up with the name Madpow. I think that's pretty interesting. I've been to your offices. I love the whole vibe and the whole setup. Tell us about the name Madpow.
Yeah, so one thing about the art of branding is that if you pick something that's sort of abstract, the company can evolve and not have to rebrand, which is nice. And also, a lot of people ask about it, but essentially, my business partner, his name is Will Powley, and he's a passionate creative. And mad cow disease was in the news some 20 years ago, and someone said, "Dude, do you have mad pow disease?" Because he was getting all excited in a meeting, and it became his nickname. And then we went with that for the company. So it's suited us well through the years.
Yeah, and so before we jump into some examples, I'm curious about two things. The first is, how has Madpow changed itself since you started? You know, how have you had to respond to industry changes or tech changes or what have you? What's your own transformation like as an organization, as a company?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we started 20 years ago, again, we were digitally focused and we were user-centered from the get-go. So we were doing the formative research to understand deeply the needs of the folks using the solutions we were creating. We were doing evaluative research to make sure that what we're creating was working for them, right? And that led to a lot of business and a lot of growth for us because a lot of companies, were sort of new to the digital game. They didn't have teams established. They needed to clean up their website. They needed to ease frustration with what they've made, and they needed to invent new digital products and explore new spaces. And so that really did fuel our growth. And we started in technology finance and then moved into health about 15 years ago because we had done a project in health where we were helping people to get to the health information most relevant to them and guide them through the diagnosis process and getting started understanding their condition, managing their condition. And it struck us, wow, in research with real human beings, what an impact can be made through helping patients to navigate to building toward self-efficacy. Selling sweaters online is great, it's exciting, but we thought, oh wow, we could really help people heal and comfort people and really help folks who are left at the center of a really disconnected ecosystem, trying to navigate on their own. There are many people who feel lost. There are many health organizations who are sort of, behind in terms of technology and in terms of experience, right? There are all these different organizations trying to serve people and patients just trying to figure it out. And so there was a lot of work to do. It really resonated with us. And so we focused in health. We're working with payers, providers, government, nonprofit, health tech, pharma, really no stone unturned. And so it gives us a great perspective into what works, what doesn't, what are the gaps, what are the unmet needs, and ultimately helping our clients to transform themselves to be more human-centered, more patient-centered, more caregiver-centered, to understand the value propositions, the needs, the struggles, the contexts, the challenges of the people and organizations serving, and help them to do better.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and that sort of leads into the second part, which is let's talk about a couple examples, because I think based on at least my experience that design sort of thinking, human-centered design, very critical in what we do in healthcare, per some of your comments already, but somewhat new concept for healthcare. And so not a lot of people really, they understand it at a theoretical level, but perhaps not at a practical level. And I know that you have done this for quite some time in healthcare and have some examples of some clients that you've served with and were able to help them with design, and which led to some pretty fantastic outcomes for them. Would you mind talking? We'll spend a few minutes giving some examples, and that way that might help take this theory for some and make it more practical and tangible.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I mean, this is new and it isn't new, right? So through design, and of course, we all realize, the experiences that organizations put out to the public need to be as good as the experience somebody had yesterday interacting with Amazon, right? There's this modern consumer expectation in terms of how they're going to be treated, and the digital quality that they're going to have, to interact with. And health has a bad rap for being behind, right? Health, I actually think, is ahead in terms of empathy, in terms of an outcomes focus, is ahead of other industries in terms of that purpose and that laser focus. But I think why we're behind in technology. I mean, there was obviously a boom in technologies to support productivity in the workplace, and digitizing databases and providing access to information and the internet, et cetera. It sort of came in through the engineering side of the house, right? The IT side of the house. Meanwhile, on the caregiver side, there's compassion, there's interaction with patients, but then you have the health system, and you've got all the laws, the flow of money, the flow of data, the flow of information, the flow of all of these things that sort of led to what we have as a health system, something that was sort of designed by default and kind of grew up over the years, and not something that is designed sort of from the patient's perspective, from the family's perspective, from even the caregiver's perspective. And it requires this fundamental shift in this transformation. And it's not something that we can necessarily get to through lean or through any one given technology, right? We know it's bigger than that. We can throw tech on the scene. It's not going to quite do it. There's no silver bullet. So what design offers is, as I mentioned, a highly inclusive and collaborative process where we are talking with all of the people affected by a solution, from stakeholders to caregivers to family members to patients, and understanding what are the needs, what are the wants, what are the expectations, and then figuring out, okay, how do we meet those needs through a digital touch, through a human touch, especially now, human intelligence versus artificial intelligence, how do we leverage both to the best of the ability, and what policies or processes do we have that need to be updated in the direction of improving somebody's journey. And so all of that is sort of dependent upon culture change and behavior change inside of an organization, because locking ourselves up in a room and kind of figuring out based on research, okay, what would the solution be, what's the best thing, that's the easy part, right? Getting it out, building consensus, bringing it to market, getting it done to the point where everybody in the organization's on board, that's the hard part. And so I mentioned behavior change earlier. That's really where we're leveraging the psychology of motivation to help people inside and outside of an organization in terms of changing their attitudes, their perceptions, and their behaviors. And really that psychology, that behavior science is crucial to improving the situation. So you asked about an example. We did, one of my favorite projects with Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical System. They spun out a subsidiary called Imagine Care, and Imagine Care was built with the hypothesis of the CEO of Dartmouth Hitchcock. He said, what would happen if care was delivered outside of the four walls of the hospital in the places where people live? And what would a hospital be like that didn't want people to visit? Not because they don't care, but because they do. And of course, with COVID now, we realize that health organizations that set themselves up to empower people in the home to care for themselves and monitor their condition and connect with people virtually, digitally, connect with their caregivers this way. They were sort of ahead, right? But the solution for Dartmouth Hitchcock, Imagine Care, it was focused on chronic health condition management. And it was the top 5, conditions: asthma, diabetes, hypertension, COPD, these things, congestive heart disease, the things people struggle with. And they would get a smartphone device that would connect to Bluetooth biometric sensing devices for their condition. So a blood pressure cuff for hypertension, a scale for congestive heart failure, etc. And so they could take their own measures every day. But the beautiful thing about this is that the data went up in the cloud, algorithms were put on it, and if any data point was out of whack, the patient would get a call. If any measure was out of whack, the patient would get a call within 2 minutes. This closed loop system, and they could secure connect with somebody on their care team at any moment, 24/7. And so, this solution, not only did patients love it and report, 95% satisfaction rating, and they said, I feel like I'm no longer alone. I feel like somebody has my back. It also reduced 20% in terms of managing the cost associated with managing that population. Health measures improved, visits to the ER were avoided, unnecessary visits to the ER were avoided. And so this was a tremendous thing. And we did it leveraging human-centered design from the get-go. We brought down risk throughout the process by involving real patients, real people, from formative research to evaluative research, usability testing, and then even into pilot as we iterated to refine the solution.
Yeah, that's a great example and very contemporary for a lot of what's going on today. As you mentioned, there was a few progressive organizations that sort of had a head start because they're already thinking along these lines. We're already halfway through our time together. It goes by so quickly. Just a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions for Amy, please don't hesitate to enter them into the software, and we will take a look at those and try to incorporate your questions or comments into our dialogue. So feel free to jump right in. Amy, the majority of our audience typically are CIOs and chief digital officers. And so if you were sitting in their place right now as a CIO, CDO, what would be your first step? Let's just say you're an organization, probably the average organization is aware of design thinking and human-centered design, but they're still in sort of the process mentality, process world. And as this emerges as a very important discipline for the reasons you've already mentioned, what would you do? How would you incorporate some of this into daily work or a project? So if I had something coming up, I throw out some examples. Maybe it is telehealth or virtual care, or it could be anything. What would be your first step? How would you start incorporating some of these concepts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, you have to start small. And if you don't have a team, hopefully, pulling in some experts or some people who are passionate about this. But really, what we find, Ed, is that, hospitals, health systems, and other health organizations, they have HCAHPS or NPS and what have you. And those are good measures. But when approaching a project, we might have analytics, we might have quantitative data, but do we have the qualitative data? Have we really taken the time to understand context? Context is everything. Understanding the mindset, the environment, the circumstances that drive an interaction. What are people's concerns? What are their questions? What are their expectations? We have a tendency to view a digital experience as an object, right? We're designing a site, we're designing an app, we're designing a virtual visit. That one experience is one moment in time in a very more broad continuum. And so we need to understand what people are bringing to an experience and what they're needing after an experience, and understanding, what are the outbound communications that sort of build awareness and drive them to this experience. How are we going to affect adoption, utilization? How are we going to onboard people effectively? How are we going to, mitigate any concerns or demystify this sort of interaction? And then afterwards, what do people need from us? How do we make things easier, more convenient? And I sort of see, so what can be done? Qualitative research, talk to real human beings. beyond, focus groups, do one-on-one interviews, do observation. There's even things we can do in this COVID environment with, video, selfie journals where, people can give you emotive point in time feedback along any journey. And these little bits, these little nuances are going to shape the trajectory of the solution, and they're going to help you avoid an embarrassing debacle, or help you to really improve and maximize adoption utilization and hit the KPIs you're looking for. Because otherwise we're sort of just finger to the wind, right? So it's essential to get that feedback. And when you have a solution, get people to give you feedback on it,
Yeah, those are excellent ways of sort of incorporating this sort of design thinking into your everyday practice. Let's do a quick role play, something I thought about where because I get this question a lot. So let's just talk about patient portals for a second. Sometimes people call them digital front doors. There's not too many true digital front doors out there. Most of them are sort of patient portals that the EHR vendors put out. Here's the question. And then I'm going to tell you the most common answer I hear, but then I want you to answer it. Sort of a leading question, but I think it's something that, again, trying to relate to most of the audience, what they would think about. So the question that comes up a lot is how do I increase engagement? A lot of these platforms, the adoption is pretty low. So the question is, how do I get better engagement into my portal? And then, so that's the question. Let me tell you the typical response from someone asking that question of themselves or maybe their organization. The typical response is, oh, we need to add additional features and functions. And then sometimes they'll add some additional features and functions, and the percentage of engagement, the needle hasn't moved very much. So Amy, kind of a leading question, but I use this question because it's a very popular question. What would you do? What would Madpow come in and say? What were some of the things that you would consider in how to drive adoption? I'm just picking on portals, but it could be other things. But how to drive adoption? Because what I heard you saying in your example and some of the earlier comments is human design thinking can really accelerate adoption and usability and experience.
Yeah, it's such a good question, Ed, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. What happened with patient portals was that we needed EHRs, EMRs, right? We needed to digitize the information. We needed to make sure that everybody could have access to it, right? And what happened was a database. There was a digital interface to a database, and so again, it was an object. Like, how do we give people access to this data? But what a patient portal is needed for is to support a patient throughout their journey, right? So it's not just viewing data, it's supporting a patient throughout their journey. And to do that, you need to understand their journey. I'll use lab results. Well, the lab results display in the patient portal. That's great. But when and how many? And what about this one, but not that one? For every one data point in the portal, 10 questions may arise. What are those questions, right? And so it's an expectation setting. It's customer service. Health organizations, there's doctors and nurses. It's not viewed as a customer service thing, right? To get a text to say, we've received, you just visited the lab. We're going to let you know via text the moment the first lab result is in, and we'll also let you know when the last lab result is going to be in, or something like that, right? It's a continuum, and it's not just what's available in the portal, it's setting expectations accordingly. And the only way you're going to get at that is to understand the journey. And I would challenge anyone in a leadership role in digital, in IT, in technology, in a health organization, in the spirit of Undercover Boss, or in the spirit of what the CEO of Geisinger advocates for, which is, C-levels doing rounds in the hospital to really know what's going on. Spreadsheets won't tell you what's going on. Analytics won't tell you what's going on. You need to talk to real human beings, right? And so really, empathy drives decision making sometimes more than anything else, because the moment you listen to a call, the moment you talk to a patient, the moment you experience things firsthand through a loved one or yourself as you're secret shopping through your own medical system, you realize, oh my goodness, we need to do better,
Yeah.
right? So I would advocate for that.
Yeah, no, that's gold. That's gold. Thank you. We have an audience question. We're down to 5 minutes, so we're going to take this question and probably have time for one more after this one before we wrap up. So this is when you work with both consumer experience and digital product teams, the experience oftentimes gets lost in the technical requirements of the digital product. Sounds familiar. Do you have any suggestions or tips, Amy, on how to make sure the experience gets granular enough so that the product team remains consistent? So the whole conundrum between, the technical requirements and experience and.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need both, right? So what we do is understand who's going to be using the system, who's going to be embarking on this experience, talk with real people who represent that constituency. In talking with them, understand what are their key goals, and then we know what our key goals for them are. What are the behaviors or the mindsets that they have that shape how they approach the experience? So we build what are called behavioral archetypes. Is somebody high touch or low touch? Do they trust tech or do they not trust tech, right? All of these behavioral attributes matter. Are they high anxiety, low anxiety? Do they trust the doctor or they want a second opinion? Like all of these things affect how they're approaching the experience. When we know what behavioral archetypes we're focusing on, then we can say, okay, how does this system support someone who's more high touch? Or how does the system support somebody who wants to be exclusively digital and doesn't want to talk to anybody? And so from those behavioral archetypes of the audience, we can then form design principles. And principles are important because instead of a law or a rule or a requirement, it's saying, okay, how are we going to be compassionate at every step? Or how do we bring this principle to life? And we can then circle back to those two things and say, okay, are we doing it? And we can actually evaluate for them ultimately as we move forward in the lean design process and testing. Have we accomplished those things that we set out to do?
Yeah, that's great. And again, another golden nugget for our audience. Thank you for the question. It is amazing. I told Amy as we were getting ready to go live how fast the time goes. Wish we had more time, but also recognize that everyone's so busy. But hopefully, after hearing from Amy directly and the examples she shared and sort of the philosophy, that everyone leaves away convinced on the importance of design. Amy, how do people get in touch with you or Madpow should they want to go deeper in this topic?
Sure. We're at madpow.com, madpow.com, and we have so many great insights and resources. For example, we just did a webinar on the research we have done in chronic condition patient journeys, and we have a chronic condition journey map that people can look at and use and build from as a tool and a foundation, right? So all of our work across the past 15 years, we're creating these tools and resources that people can use. So I definitely encourage people to check out our insights because there might be some good bits in there for them. And I'm at amy@madpow.com if you need me.
All right, well, Amy, thank you so much for being our guest.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate you. We have upcoming webinars, some fascinating topics, like the one we just covered. A variety of topics coming this week is really about the emergence of the Chief Digital Officer, or what that means. We're continuing our series. We've had a series since, I think, March on race relations in HIT specifically. And then we'll talk more on digital transformation in November with Dilip Kashu from Born. And then you can see some of the other leadership topics we have coming up in November, December. It's like very exciting times for us, and we really appreciate you being part of our audience. And thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks, Ed.